Hello, my name is Tom Sheehan, and I'm going to talk about some long-term monitoring projects we have of wild pollinators in the longleaf pine system. Here's a picture of a typical longleaf pine forest. Some characteristics of longleaf pine are this wide spacing between trees, which form a low basal area and allow an open canopy with a diverse ground cover. Much of this is achieved through frequent prescribed burning. This ground cover diversity can be as high as 40 species in a square meter and 140 species in 1,000 square meters. Arthropods in longleaf are less known, but they still have tremendous diversity. Last year, we wrote a review article that looked at arthropods in the longleaf pine system, and a component of that, we tabulated all of the species of arthropods that have been documented in the literature in longleaf pine. We came up with about 3,300 species. This, however, is a severe underestimate because of what arthropods are actually in longleaf pine. That's because we only counted those that have been reported in the literature. So there are tons of species that haven't been reported in the literature. There are also even tons of species that haven't been described to science yet that occur in longleaf. Longleaf used to cover about 37 million hectares across the southeastern United States, but since been reduced to about 1 million hectares. Much of this is due to fire suppression. So these pictures here were all taken at the exact same spot, and then fire was experimentally excluded. You can see within just 11 years, the hardwoods will encroach, close up that canopy, and reduce the ground cover. Damage from storms can threaten longleaf, as well as conversion to other pine species, such as loblolly pine or slash pine. The Jones Center at Itchaway is a nonprofit research center in the southwestern corner of the state of Georgia. We occupy about 30,000 acres, most of which is longleaf pine, but there are other habitats as well, such as wetlands and hardwood depressions, especially along the Itchaway-Notchaway Creek that flows through the middle of our property, or the Flint River that forms the eastern border. Everything on Itchaway is burned on a 2-year burn cycle, so that means everything burns at least every other year. Especially because of the amount of longleaf pine that occurs, Itchaway boasts tremendous plant diversity as well. 1,100 of Georgia's 3,600 plants can be found on the property, as well as many vertebrate species, including important species such as the red cockaded woodpecker and the gopher tortoise. 60% of all southeastern U.S. herps occur on Itchaway. We also have lots of tree species in addition to longleaf pine, about 92, 23 of which are oak alone. And of course, also have tremendous arthropod diversity. These include insects and other bugs that do all sorts of things, like hoppers that eat other plants, ground beetles that eat other arthropods, tons of beetles that eat dead and decaying wood, as well as insects that pollinate plants. 75% of all plants in the longleaf pine ecosystem are pollinated by arthropods. This could be many different types of arthropods. So you might have wasps, flies, ants, even beetles. Bees are generally considered to be the best and most effective pollinators, though. Pollinators in general across the globe face several threats, such as habitat loss, non-target pesticides, climate change, and disease. Some good news, in longleaf pine, historical land use does not appear to affect bees after restoration. Restoration thinning and fire increase bee abundance, richness, and diversity. This is often the case in other systems, not just longleaf pine. In the western United States, there have been reports of increases in bee health after beetle outbreaks that thin forests. I want to talk about members of this genus Lasioglossum for just a second. They often dominate collecting efforts in the longleaf pine ecosystem, often generating more than 50% of the individuals collected at some sites. This is often the case in sampling that involves these bee bowls that I'll talk a little bit about later. And this genus are teeny tiny little sweat bees, and they're really, really diverse. In North America, there's about 300 species in this one genus. And we're most interested about native pollinators, of course, but the Eurasian honeybee, which is not native to North America, does exist on the landscape, even in wild populations like this hive we have here on Ichway. So you may have heard about some reports of global insect decline. It's a little controversial. There have been some reports showing pretty drastic reductions, but there have been other studies that show modest declines or actually no decline at all. So it really depends a lot on the particular taxa and where in the planet. All that being said, there have been no published studies longer than 5 years on arthropods in longleaf pine. So to address this, we established a project we're calling Trends in Arthropod Biodiversity Systems, where we'll sample arthropods for 1 week in June, July, and August up until at least 2030. We'll be sampling in 4 different ecological communities that exist on Ichway: flatwoods, fluvial terrace, agriculture, which are wildlife food plots, and uplands. These differ in many different ways, but particularly soil types in the way that they drain and the vegetation that occurs on them. At each community, we'll have 15 replicates, and at each replicate, we'll have 7 traps for a total of 420. This will include blue vein traps and beebles to target bees, flight intercept traps to target wood boring and bark beetles, and pitfall traps to target ground beetles. There'll be 2 at each plot, one with a drift fence and one without. After bringing these trap samples back in, we'll take the biomass of each trap. This will be the biomass of all the arthropods in general. And here, biomass is broken down by trap. And here, biomass is now broken down by ecological community. So each of the ecological communities, they're not unique, but they do differ from each other. And then after recording biomass, we sort through and pin all of our species. So the rest of this talk, I'm just going to talk about bees, but we do look at all beetles as well. So here are all the bee genera or species from the first year, and it's broken down by trap. So you see in the dark blue, we have the blue vein traps. The lighter blue is the blue beetles, yellow for yellow beetles, white for white beetles, and black for the flight intercept traps. You know, particular species and genera show interesting distributions here. Some are really not showing up in any traps other than the blue vein traps, or the same thing for some of the beetles. And here are the genera and species broken down by ecological community, with brown for agriculture, green for fluvial terrace, purple for flatwoods, and red for uplands. Here's a total number of genera and species by ecological community as well as individuals. So I mentioned the genus Lazogossum previously and how many studies show more than 50% of individuals at some sites. We caught a lot, but not that many, about 26%. This might be due to the addition of the blue vein trap in our sampling methods. Again, this genus is really diverse. We only got down to genus right now, but we will take things to species and might see some interesting patterns there. Now, I want to just take a little bit of time to go through some notable specialist bee species that we caught in relatively high numbers. So we got about 500 of Melitoma toria, which is the morning glory turret bee. It's a specialist on morning glory. And Tylothrix bombiformis, the hibiscus turret bee, which is a specialist on hibiscus. Both of these bees are solitary and ground nesting, and they're called turret bees because they dig a tunnel in mud and form the mud into pellets, and then they roll them away from their nest and make these cool little turret shapes. They can actually walk on water and pick up little droplets to use to soften the soil. These turret structures are really cool. Sorry I don't have any pictures, but you should look it up. And Cimolobus ipomoea, the morning glory longhorn bee, which is also a specialist of morning glory. All 3 of these species are considered not common in resources, but we collected them in pretty high numbers, so that's cool. And not really many specimens collected in the agriculture fields. Bombus pennsylvanicus, the American bumblebee, we collected in pretty high numbers as well. This is a generalist. It's not a specialist like the other 3, but it is considered being listed as an endangered species in parts of its range, more like the Midwest rather than the Southeast, but it's still always exciting to collect this in high numbers. Now, this is not a bee. This is a beetle, actually, Conatellus obscurus. It's a little beetle. I don't believe it's a pollinator, but it is attracted to flowers. It lives in flowers and eats the pollen, and we collect them in really, really high numbers in our traps. I just kind of want to put this out there to see if any other bee people collect these in pretty high numbers. It's really interesting. I mean, we really get thousands and thousands. So looking forward with this project, we will continue field sampling up until at least 2030. In the meantime, we'll be sorting through samples and taking things down to species. Now shifting gears, I just want to talk a little bit about this project of translocation. So the frosted elfin butterfly is this little brown pretty guy that was considered listing under the Endangered Species Act by 2024, and it used to occur in Georgia, but has now since been extirpated. On Itchaway, we have its host plant, the sundial lupin, but we do not have the butterfly. We searched a lot. But Apalachicola National Forest, which is just over the border in Florida, has the only frosted elfin population, which is considered high condition. Because Itchaway has numerous healthy populations of lupin, we translocated 30 larvae last spring, and we'll translocate 30 pupae next spring. And we'll compare the two translocation methods. This chart here is just showing the frosted elfin life cycle. It's a little tricky though, because the best time for prescribed burning, which is important for longleaf habitat and the sundial lupin and thus the frosted elfin, is in the spring. So that kind of is a little tricky because that's when it's existing as a fragile little egg or larva. So you just need to be mindful of our fire burn regimes with that in context to support this butterfly. So in conclusion, in the longleaf pine ecosystem, frequent fire and an open canopy are good for pollinators. We're currently sampling bees and other arthropods, and will continue for the next 10 years, and we're already collecting all sorts of cool bees. And we reintroduced the imperiled frosted elfin butterfly to the state of Georgia. Fingers crossed that it will do well. Got tons of people to thank. Lots of awesome people at Itchaway staff, lots of fantastic people specifically in the forest entomology lab at Itchaway, as well as numerous other individuals involved in these projects, as well as the organizers of this symposium. Thank you for the time, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.